Hey, Earthlings, welcome to the Vegan Time Tunnel. In fact, this is the Vegan Time Tunnel Regenerated. Now, the idea is to create an archive for the movement, significant events, significant people, and we've got a very significant person today. And the idea is to build up an archive. And so we're redoing the time tunnels in order to make them a bit quicker, a bit slicker, and a bit more user friendly. So that's the basis of why these are being reorganized, if you like. And also the playlist on my YouTube channel, Roger Yates YouTube channel, is being reorganized as well. So quite a few of the original time tunnels are down, but now we're slowly putting them back up. So hopefully that will kind of help. So we're into a big name right now. This is Donald Watson, who undoubtedly is the best known of the co-founders of the vegan social movement. He didn't do as much work as a lot of people say, but he was a very significant. Now, in terms of resources, there's quite a lot for this session, not least the very first thing there, the Vegan News from 1944. So this really is the first document that the vegan social movement put out, and it was written by Watson himself. Then we have three of the vegans. So the Vegan News transformed into the Vegan, which was a journal for the society. So we've got Spring 46, Summer 88, and Autumn 94. Then we've got some other writings, one of which is by Samantha Calvert. Now, Samantha Calvert is the communications officer of the Vegan Society, and she also acted as a bit of a kind of archivist, a historian as well. And she wrote this really interesting document, which is still there on the Vegan Society website, called Ripened by Human Determination. That is a throwback to one of the things that Watson said himself in 1944, that people need to be ripened up to new ideas. Then we've got some material from an encyclopedia of social and political movements. And then we've got some more stuff from the kind of modern age, if you like. A Message for All Vegans by Ed Winters, Earthling Ed. And then there's also a document called Boycott Veganism. The author at the time was uncredited, but it's believed to be Wayne Sean from DXC. It was part and parcel of this argument going on at the time that vegans or animal activists should be focused on activism rather than veganism. So it was a boycott vegan move, if you like. And then we're using material from the Donald Watson archive, which is 3 sociologists, or 4 really now, but Kate Stewart in particular with Matthew Cole. And then we've got Iris Crane, spelt wrong there, I'm afraid. But she was like a research assistant, I think, been replaced now, although I don't have the detail of the name. So the Donald Watson archive looks like it's going to be a really kind of interesting resource. One thing that came from that is this, which is a document written by Watson in his own hand. I suppose it's kind of like Watson's manifesto, set of rules, whatever you want to say. And the first one is obvious: no meat or fish, no dairy products or eggs. Number 2, no tobacco, alcohol, or other drugs is number 3. Number 4, no medicines or vitamin pills or cosmetics. Interesting to put those 3 together. Adequate sleep was important to Donald Watson. Adequate exercise, that's number 6. Number 7, some food taken raw every day, which is probably good advice. Number 8, all food organic. Number 9, weight kept normal. So obviously those are contentious issues nowadays, of course, but weight kept normal is number 9. Avoiding crowds, number 10, that's an interesting one. It looks like Donald Watson didn't like crowds very much. Number 11, DIY religion. He does say in other writings that the co-founders of the vegan social movement were not religious in any orthodox sense. They were more kind of spiritual, you might say, and certainly that is reflected in the kind of things that they said. Number 12, free from monetary debt. Good news for everybody, of course. Number 13, no unprovoked aggression. So no fisticuffs for Donald Watson. Number 14, only raw sugar used, which is an interesting one. And then number 15, which I always like as a Yorkshireman. Donald Watson was a Yorkshireman too. And he says no cold baths or sunbathing, which I always think is quite an interesting thing for a Yorkshireman to say. You probably wouldn't want to have too many cold baths in Yorkshire, the Republic of, and you might not get much chance to sunbathe either. Now, this is an interesting one. This is 95. The first bit is undoubtedly incorrect, but the second bit is quite profound. I doubt if many people would be interested in the details of my life, unless, of course, veganism is seen to have cracked the code that has beaten everyone else, to show for the first time our man can live healthily and at peace in this hostile world. This may be some time ahead. Obviously, in terms of calling humanity man, that's just a product of this time. I'm not going to correct it. I tend to regard my audience as adults in that sense. So Donald Watson was born on the 2nd of September 1910 in Mexborough, and that's South Yorkshire, as I said, the son of a school headmaster. So that puts him, I suppose, as a middle-class child. And as a child, the young Donald Watson holidayed on a farm that was run by his grandmother and her son. And innocently, Donald thought that these holidays were heavenly. He described them as heavenly. He was delighted, for example, to find himself surrounded by lots of interesting other animals, horses, cats, he mentioned dogs, cows, chickens, a cockerel, sheep, and pigs. It had eventually struck the young Donald Watson that all these other animals had some function, that they had things to give to humans. He says, quote, I realized that they all gave something, unquote. But then he asked himself, what about the pigs? Watson said, I could never understand what the pigs gave. All the other animals gave something, but I couldn't for the life of me see what the pigs gave. And they were such friendly creatures, always glad to see me and grateful for anything that was thrown to them in the sty. So one day, the young Donald Watson went downstairs and Grandma was not alone. In fact, 4 strangers were there. And he said, it wasn't long before the business of killing one of the pigs began. No attempt was made to keep me away from the scene. I just went there full of interest to see what all this was about. And I still have vivid recollections of the whole process from start to finish, including all the screams, of course. So Donald Watson was shocked to discover that animal farms were actually killing machines. He says that they were death rows where every creature's days were numbered. And he concluded in his young mind, I suppose, that were he to report on humanity's progress, he would write that we as a species could do better. So all this, Watson says, paved his way to veganism, to the formation of the first vegan social movement organization, the Vegan Society. He saw no other social movement offering as much as the vegan movement, and saw it as a salvation of humanity. Now, it's probably fair to say that that's not exactly the way he saw veganism right at the beginning, but he came to see that as the Vegan Society grew and evolved, and particularly due to the work of Leslie Cross, he saw that veganism was indeed a revolutionary idea And so the idea expanded and expanded in his mind. Now, there's a lot that's been written about Donald Watson. Some of it is true. A lot of it isn't. What's not true is that Watson single-handedly invented veganism, or that he wrote a comprehensive definition of veganism in 1944. In fact, Watson himself was keen to spread the blame for the foundation of the vegan social movement amongst several others. For example, he said this: "I hesitate to single out anyone, but I would say Leslie Cross and Arthur Ling must be put in the records as being the two outstanding, faithful contributors to the cause." In terms of who coined the actual word vegan, the sociologists researching the archive, Stuart Cole and Crane, said that Watson claims that he and his wife, Dorothy, came up with it jointly at a dance hall in Leicester. Now, for a variety of reasons, and anyone who's seen my work and the time tunnels before, you've heard me say that there are some people within the animal advocacy movement in the 21st century. They've attempted to reduce, to slim down, make quite shallow the philosophy of veganism. This is quite regretful in my mind. For example, while some tend to regard veganism as merely a diet, which is wrong, others suggest that the concerns of vegans are restricted to the liberation of our fellow animals and nothing to do with human liberation. Both of those claims are not accurate. And he was once asked if he had any message for new vegans, as it were. He replied, "Yes, I would like them to take a broad view of what veganism stands for. Something beyond finding a new alternative to, shall we say, scrambled eggs on toast or a new recipe for a Christmas cake." He would like them to realize that they're onto something really big, that they've joined something which is very kind of meaningful and very big in historical and political terms. In his later life, he was invited to write for The Vegan, the journal of the Vegan Society, and he was kind of like seen as the president then, or, kind of figurehead, if you like. He regularly thanked the people who had followed his generation of vegan pioneers for maintaining their adherence to vegan philosophical principles. But just as he warned in the very first vegan bulletin, the 1944 one, nothing is automatic, and that social movements need to guard against everything sliding, like core values, for example. He wrote in 2003 to Arthur Ling, "Since veganism by definition claims to help animals and people," he underlined the word people, "the Vegan Society must do its part in showing how to bring it about." So let's just drop back for a little while to see the foundations of the values that turned out to be the values of the Vegan Society, if you like. Something other than being confronted with the realities of animal farming was to have a profound effect on the young Donald Watson. His politics and his views about humanity in general were forever shaped by the events of World War II. And the events of World War II really sickened him. In 1994, looking back on the first 50 years of the vegan social movement, Watson noted that people were shattered by the tragedy of war. So much so that in 1944, as the conflict drew to a close, most had little time to fuss over the fate of a few animals. So tellingly, in terms of the scope of the vegan movement, which was yet to evolve, Watson says that the vegan pioneers would never agree with the general population that a war on animals was a just war. To the contrary, it was the position of the vegans that humanity's tyranny towards humans and other animals were connected. He says that the vegan pioneers were not religious in any orthodox sense, as I said, but they did take the commandment, thou shalt not kill, seriously and applied it to our fellow animals as well as humans. In other words, getting that principle, if you like, over the species barrier. Watson said, if our vision of a better world was a dream, it was a dream to escape the nightmare of a world overflowing with evil. The humans in the world overflowing with evil, he states, saw nothing wrong with killing our fellow animals. We, the vegans, on the other hand, felt that we were facing the issue of morality at its most basic level, which is a pretty interesting position to take, which became a theme within the vegan social movement for many years. Watson lost several friends during the war, including colleagues from the vegetarian societies, vegetarian movement that he was involved in before the advent of the vegan social movement. He was saddened by the idea of killing people who were strangers to him. He couldn't really get his head around that idea. He was particularly saddened by the 50,000 people killed in one raid on Dresden. Their bodies subsequently piled up and burnt because there was no way to bury so many. And so Watson saw no choice as a personal matter but to become a conscientious objector, a CO. And of course, COs in the war were punished for that decision. He said this, it was a terrible dilemma for anyone with high principles to see thousands, millions of people killed because the whole idea was so mad that man should still, at this late stage in his evolution, be trying to solve his problems by this evil method. You could say that that applies right now too, of course. By now, Watson was a night school teacher on reduced pay because he was a conscientious objector, but he was also a member of the auxiliary fire service. That's one of the things that a lot of the vegan social movement pioneers did. They refused to fight, but they did fight fires, as it were, and that kind of thing. He himself escaped the possibility of death around 1940 because he believed that at least some of the German wartime raids that destroyed large parts of the city of Coventry were meant for Leicester. That's also in the Midlands in Britain. And so the bombs that were meant for Leicester ended up in Coventry. So this is the devastation. Watson mentions the notion of humanity's evolution in one of his quotes mentioned before. This theme was to become very important in the early years of the vegan social movement, as the pioneers appeared to see the values embedded within veganism as challenging the barbarity that created both war and exploitation in general. Veganism should be seen as part of the moral evolution of humanity, they believed. Watson said that he liked to think that the vegan movement is the greatest movement that ever was. The reason he gave for this may shock animal advocates who assert in this day and age that veganism is only for the animals. In 2002, when he was 92 years old and 104 days old, he said that veganism is the greatest of movements because, quote, it is the only one now that can save mankind. Watson declared that all other movements were lesser movements compared to veganism because they had a limited vision of the future, whereas veganism didn't. He said that such lesser movements were as people rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, whereas they could be helping the vegans who were busy shining the searchlight on the iceberg. And he said the iceberg is, quote, going to end the whole show. So this actually, what's on the screen there, is a meme that I did. I'm not particularly claiming it's any good, but it's supposed to articulate that kind of statement from Watson. Making somewhat of a prophetic pronouncement, Watson pointed out that nature rebels against any species that becomes too numerous, usually by food shortages or by disease, both of which, he said, is now rampaging ahead in the human community. So he argued that vegans alone have the possible solution to these crises. So it's not an exaggeration to say that the early vegan vision of the future was fairly spectacular. You could say utopian, but we must once again remember that people are a product of their time, and the times that these people lived through were fairly profound. They'd experienced two sickening wars involving population from all over the planet, which is why they're called world wars or global conflicts. They saw the rise of the far right, as we are now, unfortunately, in the shape of the Third Reich. They had experienced carpet bombing and widespread destruction, the laying waste of entire cities. They saw that locally, as it were, but also learnt about it through the news as well. And they came to learn about the death camps and the ghettos and the realities of war in general. I try to remind people that for a generation that have learnt about these things through, history books and even films, it's very different than their experience, where they actually lived it on a day-to-day basis, hearing the realities of all this on their radio. Must have been fairly terrifying. The trauma of warfare on individuals is now well known. Some relatives of veterans of wars report that their fathers and their mothers, aunts and uncles, etc., could never bear to talk about what they witnessed. So often the details of the horror that went on went with them to their graves. The vegan pioneers, however, saw that trauma had damaged and degraded human society. They feared that their recent history had revealed some form of de-evolution of humanity, that humans had become more savage and more likely to see violence as a means to resolve problems and disputes. The early vegan pioneers believed that veganism's vision that exploitation of humans and our fellow animals was connected could result in a vegan future that could correct and eliminate the violence that they saw all around them. And Watson said, "We don't know the spiritual advancements that long-term veganism, not over years or even decades, but over generations, would have on human life." It would certainly be a very different civilization, and the first one in the whole of the history that would truly deserve the title of being a civilization, full stop. Finally, there are these relatively new commentaries that I mentioned at the beginning within the vegan community or the animal activist community, suggesting that veganism is not enough and that veganism itself is a passive posture. This, unfortunately, is a reducitarian position on veganism and is unwarranted. Prominent social media activists suggest that vegans will simply stand by and watch humans attack other animals, while there's an infamous manifesto entitled Boycott Veganism, and that concludes this: if we want to stand up for animals, then we should stop calling ourselves vegan, stop asking others to go vegan, and even stop using the word vegan. Such simplistic notions appear to go out of their way to misrepresent and distort the meaning of veganism. And certainly it ignores the views of the pioneers of the vegan social movement, which are often dismissed and distorted in sentence such as this one. When we examine how the Go Vegan message frames the animal rights debate, we see how we are playing into our opponent's hands. The concept of veganism necessarily focuses on the human who chooses a particular lifestyle. That lifestyle may be informed by ethical principles, no doubt, but the framing has been set. The debate is about human choices and interests rather than animal rights and brutality. This is a really distorted view. The vegan pioneers not only set out to analyze the savagery that they had lived through, but they also wanted to do something about it. They wanted to do something about the problem of humanity, as they often expressed it. Sociologists and social movement theorists see social movements as claims makers in civil society. Social movements typically make claims about the problems that they see and that they have identified. Donald Watson famously suggested in 1944 that people needed to be ripened up to new ideas. So he fully understood that change doesn't just happen, that social actors have to make it happen. There is nothing passive about being a member of the vegan community in this sense. Of course, people don't have to do anything, but there's nothing within veganism that encourages them to not do any activism, for example. In the very first edition of the Vegan News, Watson told his readers that there is an obvious danger of leaving the fulfillment of our ideals to prosperity. For prosperity may not have our ideals. Evolution can be retrogressive as well as progressive. Indeed, there seems always to be a strong gravitation the wrong way, unless existing standards are guarded and new visions honored. For this reason, we have formed our group. So I've put the emphasis in there myself, but this is him talking about the very reason why the vegan social movement was formed. In his 2004 chapter entitled The Greatest Cause on Earth, the historical formation of veganism as an ethical practice, sociologist Matthew Cole identifies the aims of the vegan movement. He says they're radically transformative and emancipatory. And he says this: the vegan telos, or the aim of object, combines compassionate non-exploitation of other animals with an emancipated vegan self and a more compassionate human society. Vegan ethics from the beginning was directed towards these interconnected goals of transforming human beings and transforming human society, with both flowing from the foundational reconfiguration of human, non-human animal relation. And he also argues, it's another quote from the same paper, that the breathtaking scope of the transformative vision of the vegan pioneers may inspire a recentering of vegan ethics in the practice of and advocacy of all those who oppose exploitation in its myriad and pernicious forms. Details of origin should always be interesting and vital if a movement is to remain faithful to its precepts. So Cole is quoting Watson there, which basically says that, we should, guard our core values and uphold them for as long as we can. Matthew Cole has pointed out that from 1948 to 1951, the cover strapline of the Vegan Society magazine, The Vegan, stated advocating living without exploitation. Far from being just a diet or only about our fellow animals, the driving philosophy of the vegan social movement represents a revolution that is arguably needed even more now than it was in the 1940s and 1950s when these radical ideas emerged. As far back as 1947, Watson recognized that a profound change in culture is needed to bring about veganism. Veganism is revolutionary, he came to understand. And he said that if the vegan ideal of non-exploitation were generally adopted, it would be the greatest peaceful revolution ever known, abolishing vast industries and establishing new ones in the better interests of men and animals alike. Okay, people, that's Vegan Time Tunnel Regenerated on Donald Watson. I will see you again soon. Bye for now.